If you want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 25, that's where we're going to begin this evening. I want to take a moment to thank the elders, especially for the invitation to speak to you this evening, and I hope that it'll be profitable for all of us. In Matthew chapter 25, we have a parable that I think is familiar to almost all of us, but we'll read through it first, and then we'll get into some applications from this lay beside that Christ presents for us here. Starting in verse 14, "For it is as when a man, going into another country, called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his several ability. And he went on his journey. Straightway he that received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. In like manner he also that received the 2 gained another 2. But he that received the 1 went away, and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money. Now after a long time the Lord of those servants cometh, and maketh a reckoning with them. And he that received the 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou hast delivered unto me 5 talents, lo, I have gained another 5 talents. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will set thee over many things. And he also that received the 2 talents came to and said to the Lord, Thou deliverest unto me 2 talents, lo, I have gained another 2 talents. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will set thee over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. And he also that had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou didst not sow, and gathering where thou didst not scatter. And I was afraid, and I went away, and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, thou hast thine own. But his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I did not scatter. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the bankers, and at my coming I should have received back my own with interest. Take ye away therefore the talent from him, and give it to him that hath the 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not, even that which he hath shall be taken away. And cast ye out the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Again, I think this is one of the more familiar parables of Christ, so most of us have heard it before. But there's some things in here that I think are relevant to each and every one of us, and that are important for us to note. To give you a little bit of context for this is a very similar parable to what you find in Luke chapter 19. It follows the same sort of pattern. It's an investment from a master to his servants. And it appears here in Matthew between 2 other parables, the parable of the 10 virgins and the parable of the sheep and the goats, both of which are parables that ultimately are dealing with judgment. And this has the same kind of context. This has the day of judgment in it. When the master comes back and has the day of reckoning with the different servants, again, the context here is be prepared for the day of judgment. But I think this particular parable hits on something very specific in the way that we need to be prepared. It tells the story of 3 servants of a wealthy master. And the first thing I want to notice here is I keep using this word talent because I'm reading from the ASV in this version. But it's really important to know that talent here is not the way that we use talent in English, although our word talent does actually come from this passage. Talent here is a unit of money. And 1 talent in this time period, and it varies depending on which scholar you want to listen to, but something that most of them agree on is that it's roughly equal to 16 to 20 years worth of a common worker's wages. So to put that in the context here of American money, modern day today, if this helps you in any way, I'm imagining around $500,000 in our time. And that's roughly 60 to 20 years worth of earnings of someone making an average salary. And this is where I think it gets tricky and you want to be precise. The talents are given to each according to their ability, which again highlights the point. This is money. It's something that's being given to them for skills. It's not actually their skills or their abilities. It's given to them according to their skills, according to their abilities. And that's an important distinction here. And I think with the applications that we're going to make, I think you'll see where we're going with that. But it's very much given with the expectation that they use this to make more, to make a profit, that they actually exploit the investment that their master is giving them to grow it and to make something out of it. This is similar to the concept that Brother Jared spoke on a bunch this morning about bearing spiritual fruit, that our lives are supposed to bear spiritual fruit. And it's similar in the passage in Colossians 1, 3 through 6, where it's talking about the gospel being preached, and that where it's preached, it bears spiritual fruit. The idea here is that you start out with the gospel being spread, you start out with a certain level of something, and then there's gain that happens. That does something. It's not static, is the idea. Also note in verses 26 through 30, when you have the reckoning with the unprofitable servant, his condemnation is specifically for not capitalizing on this money, this investment that he's given, or I'm going to use the word here, opportunity, with the context being spiritual opportunity. He's condemned because he doesn't take what he has been given and does something with it. Instead, he goes and he buries that money into the ground, and he's called slothful, which is the same concept of laziness, and that's accounted to him for wickedness. It's not enough that I just am here and that I presented back what you gave to me. He was expected to do something with the opportunities that he was given. And it's, again, the same concept that we have that Brother Jared spoke about this morning when he read in Matthew 12, this idea of a person who the unclean spirit has been taken out of him, but he doesn't put anything in its place. The absence of evil is not the same thing as actually doing good, and we have in that passage that once the spirit finally comes back and he finds the man in the same situation he was, his home there inside this man is swept and garnished, and he brings 7 other evil spirits with him. It's the same sort of idea. It's that you can't just not do bad. That's not how you get into heaven. That will get you condemned because you're not taking advantage of the opportunities you do have and doing something with them. It's not the same thing as actually doing good. Also, we have here in the judgment, there's a twofold judgment here. One is the investment that he had, that he was given, the opportunities that he was given. It's taken from him and it's given to the man who has the abundance already. And then secondly, he's cast into the darkness, into the punishment, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, where we understand this is a reference to eternal torment in hell. I want to look at 2 of the things that he says and the judgment that's placed on him to really mine out a few important points and applications for our lives. The first one in verse 25, when he's explaining why or giving excuses why he didn't do anything with the opportunities that he was given, he says that I was afraid. So he's saying I was fearful. And that's in the context of his master's expectations. But I want to note it's the servant with the least amount of responsibility here that actually fails. And I don't think that's not done on purpose. I think that's the way things tend to work. You would expect, intuitively at least, that the person who has the most weight placed on his shoulders, the servant that's given the 5 talents, is going to be the most likely one to fail, the one with the most responsibility. But that's not the way that things tend to work in life. And part of that is because the person who's given the most responsibility usually didn't get there from the get-go. They grew into that position of responsibility and opportunity. And it's a natural thing that actually taking that first step on the path, whether you're talking about a spiritual path or whether you're talking about paths in life, it's extremely common to hear when you're talking about exercising. The hardest thing is to show up and get started. When you're talking about education, well, the hardest step is taking the first step. It's learning the first thing in whatever field of study you're trying to gain in. And here, I think the same principle is shown. It's much more likely someone who is facing one of their first early spiritual opportunities, who hasn't started growing, That's the most difficult thing, really getting started. And part of that is because you can see the standards that are before you. You can see what God expects of you. There's a lot in the Bible, there's a lot in the scriptures that tell you about the life that you're supposed to lead. I'll tell you, I had someone that I was studying with and working with early on earlier on in my life, I will say. It was years ago. One of the things that he came and talked to me about in the process of us studying and talking about the Christian life, it sort of threw me. He asked me, well, okay, I want to get started on this, but what do you do when you stumble after you've gotten started and it's in something that you know you were struggling with, you knew about it beforehand, you knew this was something that was going to be a problem for you, and you still stumble again, even though you know about it and you know you shouldn't be doing it, and you know you're trying to change. How do you deal with that when that keeps coming up? And this threw me because it immediately took me in my mind to the things that I struggle with and that, I'll be honest, I still continue to struggle with. And I don't know that I gave him the best answer at the time, but I gave him an answer that's relevant to this lesson. I think it's the idea of, I look at where I am today, and I look at where I was, and I ask, have I improved? Am I as troubled by the same thing? Am I any stronger? Have I gotten any better at avoiding the temptations, at avoiding the stumbling blocks? Have I grown at all? And that becomes a different way to look at this standard that I think is very relevant to what he's talking about in spiritual opportunities. Have you taken advantage of the one talent that he's handed you and grown that? Are you further along than where you were? And it's a challenge because before us are all these examples of people with the 5 talents, the 2 talents that are ahead of us. And it doesn't matter how far along the path you get, there's always somebody that you look up to. That's always the way it tends to be. And our standard, our own personal standard for where we need to be, I think is as much as we feel like we tend to be very arrogant. We can be in the things that we do and the things that we say. I think that a lot of times there's much more that we say to ourselves that no one else hears that is incredibly critical. And it's not without reason, right? We know God's standards and we know they're strict. But at the same time, he calls his burden light. Because compared to living in sin, the opportunity of salvation, my question is it worth it? Is it worth it to take that on? I mean, he was the least talented steward, and you may be someone who's just begun your spiritual life, just put on Christ, and you may not be that advanced yet, and you may look at people that you think are more accomplished, some people that are more learned in the scriptures. People who seem to struggle less with sin. People who are better at looking for others' needs and making sure that they're met. And you look at that and you go, I don't think I could ever do that. I'm worried I won't ever get there. I've had this problem in my professional life as well. Somebody that I work with that I manage, one of his questions kept being, okay, how in the world do I get to where I know what you know about computers and security? And I told him, look, you don't need to know everything I need to know right now, today, overnight. Start learning this. Start learning that. Read this framework through and ask me questions if you don't understand it. Take advantage of the one talent you have and grow that. That's the challenge here. It's difficult, I think, to explain to someone, too, when you're talking about growth like that and growing your ability to take advantage of the opportunities in front of you, to explain to them, you will get there. right? Because the reality of the matter is that failure of that effort is in fact possible. But the thing is, when you have experience, one of the things that you try to impart to people that don't is, yes, you can fail, and you probably will fail. In fact, I would venture to say that there isn't a Christian that was born that put on Christ that is walking that never stumbles. So you will fail. But the question is, will you learn something from that failure? And the answer is, as long as you get back up and you keep walking down the path, yes. Yes, as long as you repent and you keep going, you learn something even from the failure. That becomes experience that helps you then do better next time. But it's extremely difficult, if you don't already have that experience, to see that from someone that's telling you that. And I understand that. But here's the key warning from this passage. Inaction is guaranteed failure. It is far, far, far better to try to take your one talent and go invest it and try to grow it and try to find new opportunities than to do absolutely nothing, because that's guaranteed failure. That's what earns you the condemnation that occurs in verse 27 and verse 28 for this unprofitable servant. Look in verse 24. Because the other thing that he says before he gets to talking about his fear is he says, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, and gathering where you did not scatter. I don't know about you, but I'm really struck when I hear him say this, by him turning and pointing the finger back at God. The same way that when you hear Adam in the garden in Genesis 3 saying, the woman that thou gavest me, she gave to me, and I did eat. And it comes through as a kind of bitterness to me that this unprofitable servant is saying, God, really, the problem here, I'm not going to say anything against you, but the problem here is really that your standards are too high. You're expecting too much from me here. I knew you were hard. I knew you were difficult. I knew you reap where you didn't even sow. You gather where you didn't even scatter. And that made me afraid, But really, that's a fear born out of a kind of bitterness, that you don't like the system, you don't like the way it's set up, and you don't like the expectations. And that fear of seeing other examples can easily turn into envy if it's powered by bitterness at the situation and not liking the expectations that are placed on you. You can come to actually be angry at your own situation and say, I would do those things. I would go visit the sick. I would take a stand for the truth. I would preach, or I would teach. I would do all of these things, but you just don't understand how hard my situation is. You have all these advantages. They have all those advantages. I just don't have that. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the health. I don't have this. I don't have that. My own situation is not like other people's. I have it so much harder. And that can become an excuse for why we don't do things to actually take advantage of spiritual opportunities in front of us. But one thing I want to note here, never in this passage is the one talented servant condemned for not having 2 talents or not having 5 talents, not having the abilities to handle those greater investments. He's not condemned for that. Turn with me to 1 Timothy 5. This is a passage that we should be familiar with from this morning when Brother Derek was teaching us in class. But it's in the context of widows and relieving widows and widows that are widows indeed. And in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 5, now she that is a widow indeed and desolate hath her hope set on God, and continueth in supplication and prayers night and day. But she that giveth herself to pleasure is dead while she liveth. Okay, so you have two options here, right? You have a widow who is genuinely a widow indeed, but then beyond that, you're applying the standard of there's the widow indeed who specifically is taking, even though she has nothing, is devoting herself to God. She has her hope set on God. And she's continuing in supplication and prayers. And that may be all that she can do. That may be all that she can do, but she's doing it. Versus the one who's looking for her own pleasures. And if a widow who's presented as truly desolate can give herself to supplication and prayer, there is no situation, especially a widow in this time period where it made a massive difference whether or not you had a family to look after you when you get into an advanced age. There is no situation that you are going to face in which there is nothing that you can do spiritually for God. That situation doesn't exist. And there is no dishonor. There is no disrespect from God. You may be disrespected of men, but there is no disrespect of God for doing only what you can do. We're going to be held accountable for how we handle our lives, for how we handle the talents that are given to us, not how we compare to others. And this can cut both ways. One, it doesn't matter how you compare to others that may be doing more than you are capable of doing, but it certainly compares in the opposite direction as well. I once had an advisor when I was in high school, in my senior year of high school, and he was talking about college entrance requirements. And one of the things that he talked about, because it's so easy when I was in high school to get caught up in how you're doing next to your peers in this pool of your high school. But when you get to the point where you're looking to the next pool that you're about to join of people, he told me no one is going to care, no college is going to care that, okay, you failed, but you didn't fail as bad as Timmy. Nobody cares. They just care that you failed. And the same thing can be held true here from this passage. If there had been a half a talent man, and that person grew his talent, do you think that he would have been condemned? And the 1 talent man would have been then okay? That, yes, but I still have the 1 talent. I'm giving to you the same amount that he has. Well, no, that wasn't what was asked of you. What was asked of you is, okay, you did better than someone who started off worse than you. That's not enough. You have to actually take what's given to you and make use of that. It doesn't matter how we compare to others. And ultimately, if our attitude is one of excuses, the same way that this servant is giving excuses, that really only shows distrust in God. Because God has told us, 1 Corinthians 10:13, that whatever temptation you're facing, it's not above what you're able. That He's faithful, that He'll provide you the way of escape. So if you're ensnared in temptations and you're offering excuses, my question is, did you not trust in God? Did you not believe God that there was a way for you to escape? Are you saying that He didn't do what He said He would do? He tells us in 1 Corinthians 3. Turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And this is Paul talking about the work that they did with the Corinthians. What then is Apollos and what is Paul? Ministers through whom you believed, and each as the Lord gave to him. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither is he that watereth, but God that gives the increase. If you're worried that the things you try to do in the faith are not going to be successful, again, my question is, Do you not believe that it's God that gives the increase in the first place? Do what you can do. Take what you have and make investment with it. In Hebrews chapter 11, turn with me there as well. Because I think this passage really brings home what I'm trying to say here. If you're going to worry about all of those things that we tend to make excuses about, and you're not going to trust in God, that when you take up a spiritual work, that it has a meaning and it has a purpose that's worthwhile, I would turn you to this passage. And without faith it is impossible to be well-pleasing unto him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that seek after him. By faith Noah, being warned of God concerning things not seen as yet, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, through which he condemned the world, and became heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. It's not enough just to believe in God, in his existence. You have to also believe in what God is. And that is, he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, and believe the way that Noah believed. Say, I'm going to build this ark. I'm going to do this spiritual work. I don't know that I'm going to see the effects of this necessarily. But I'm going to do this because this is what I can do. This is what's in front of me. I see the opportunity. I'm going to take it, Lord. I'm going to do what I can do. And then I'm going to trust the rest into your hands. If you can't do that with the attitude of a servant looking to take advantage of opportunities for his Lord and not for himself, not looking to ourselves, not looking to the examples of others, and not out of bitterness or envy or fear, but trusting in God and having faith in him, you're not going to be able to please God. I also want to note, going back to verse 29, because we have a passage here that talks about part of the sentence that's passed down on this servant. We understand the second part of casting the servant out into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But there's another part of sentence that's passed on him here. And that is the talent that he did have, the talent he did nothing with, this opportunity that he was given. It's taken away from him and it's given to the man who had the 5 talents to start with and who's made 10 out of it. Now, I've read a lot of commentaries this week in studying on this passage, and this particular point within the parable gets used in a lot of different ways, and I don't want to go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes that don't necessarily have anything to do with other scriptures. But I think that there's some important takeaways here that at least where I'm going with this, I know to be true from other scripture. The first is that note that effort, that action, that gaining experience, we've already examined this. It's true in other areas of life. It's certainly true in your spiritual life. That all expands opportunities. And what's more, we talked about this in class with Brother Derek this morning, it also causes spiritual growth. If you're going to make an effort, if you're going to try, if you're going to study, if you're going to pray, if you're going to work, you will get spiritual growth out of that. That's part of the process. But the other side of this, and where I want to go with this, is that wasted opportunities often go to those who are more accomplished and those who are the most active. And again, this is something that is true not just from the standpoint of spiritual life. It's so true in the business world that there's even an equation to try and describe the situation. And I don't want to go too much into the math, but in the shorthand version of it is the idea that in a group of 100 people, 10 of those people will be doing 50% of the work. And this tends to hold true, however you scale the organization, there's always a small portion of the whole that's doing most of the actual work. And if you've ever had any experience working in groups of people, you're probably pretty familiar with this too. It tends to fall on one or two people within even a small group that then take on the lion's share of things. And they always tend to be the most active people who are trying to do the most, who are looking to do the most, who care the most about whatever the endeavor is, succeeding and working on it. Understand that there's a serious chance here that if you waste opportunities that are given to you, those opportunities will disappear because there's somebody else that will take on that work. I mean, this is as simple as if you wait around to sign up for a meal list for somebody that needs meals, that list will probably fill up with other people who are more serious about it. But it takes on more dangerous meanings when you take it in the context of this passage. Momentum matters is the idea here. As we said earlier, there's no neutral serving of God. There's either not serving God or there's serving God, but there is no just absence of doing bad that's okay. There's either you're working or you are not working. And the place where this language is shown again is actually in Matthew chapter 13, which was part of Brother Jared's reading this morning. And if you turn over there with me, it's in the context of knowledge of the truth. And starting in verse 10, again, this should be familiar from this morning. And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou to them in parables? And he answered and said unto them, Unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have abundance. Same kind of language. But whoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that which he hath. And the context here, again, we read this morning, is the knowledge of the gospel. You're talking to the apostles that understand the application of the parables, and then there were those who were listening, but not listening. Those who were spiritually blind, who did not understand the application of what they were hearing, and that's why he continues to speak to them in parables, is what he gives here as the idea. And my point is here, if you are being slothful, if you are being lazy in the opportunities that are given to you, it's far more likely that you're going to continue to do that, continue not to address problems in your life, potentially, continue to not do the things that you could do, than it is for you to get started. And likewise, once you do get started, and once you start to do work, it's far more likely that you're going to be able to continue to do that you're going to continue to move in that positive direction, because when things go wrong, you're more likely to be able to deal with them the more work that you've done and the longer you've been on this path. The further that you've gone, the less the valleys that you have to pass through seem like such a big deal. It's natural. It's momentum. It's spiritual momentum. So then, what is the point of this lesson tonight? What is the point of this passage? I think the point of the passage is a warning for us to invest spiritually, for us to profit spiritually, for us to succeed. And we haven't taken a lot of time in recognizing spiritual opportunities. I think that could be an entire other lesson. This is more about your attitude to the opportunities that you have in front of you. And this list is a short one. It is by no means an exhaustive one. But take stock of the opportunities that you have, would be my recommendation. It's my recommendation to myself as well, I'll tell you. Because reading this passage again put me back in the mind of what is before me that I have not started taking up and started doing. My prayer life could be better. My studying life could be better. My worship could be more earnest. I could take more opportunities to teach and persuade. I could definitely take more opportunities to edify my brethren here. All of us have to resist temptation, submit to God, endure persecution, stand for the truth of the gospel, stand against error, meditate on the scriptures, and grow. And like I say, this is just a short list with a short set of passages behind them. There are many other spiritual opportunities. Take stock of the ones that you have. And pick the ones up that you haven't picked up yet, and take advantage of them. And as you're doing that, look for new spiritual opportunities, because quite often, if you have your eyes open, opening one door will open another, or several others. Commit to serve the Lord better than you did yesterday. That's how growth happens. You don't have to commit to being where you're going to be in 5 years tomorrow, but look at where you are now and commit to tomorrow I'm going to be better than I was today. I'm going to grow for the Lord. And finally, if you haven't already put on Christ, I'd urge you to take that opportunity right now, tonight. Don't waste the chance to start down that spiritual path. The first step is most definitely the hardest, but you have a number of brethren here, all of us trying to walk the exact same path, and all of us having our own struggles that we're willing to share our experience, our encouragement, and anything that we can do for you. If you haven't put on Christ, or if you have put on Christ, but you've allowed yourself to stagnate, to stumble, to fall away, we ask that you would make the effort to come forward now as we stand and as we sing.